Okay, good evening. We are now in Parashat Mishpatim. That would be Exodus 21, verse Hey. Kaf Aleph, Pasuk Hey. And I'm just turning the page myself. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to read a few verses before. You know what? Let's start again. Good evening. We're now going to start within Parashat Mishpatim. That would be in Exodus chapter 21. We're going to go to verse 4 in the Kli Yakar, but I'll read some of the previous verses. For example, 2. When you will buy a Hebrew servant, he shall work for 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go to freedom without charge. Kitikna Eved Ivri, when you purchase this Jewish slave, Sheshanim Ya'avod, he shall work for you for 6 years. Ubishvit, and in the 7th year, Yetze Lachav Shechinam, he goes out to freedom without any ransom or any charge. 3, if he come alone, for example, he's not married, he shall go out alone. Im begapo yavo, begapo yetze. So he came alone, he goes out alone. V'im ba'al ishahu, if he is married, if he's the husband of a woman, v'yetze ishto imo, his wife should go out with him. Meaning the wife that he came in with, of course, she goes out when he is free. If his master will give him a woman, im adonav yitain lo isha, if his master shall give him a woman, v'yalda lo banim o banot, so if she gave birth, right, she bore to him children, boys and girls, so that woman will remain with her master, and he goes out alone. Okay, so I just want to preface this with some understanding here. We are dealing with a case where the person was sold into slavery in one of two ways. Either he was a thief, and we're going to discuss the difference between a thief and a robber. He was a ganav, as opposed to a gazlan. He was a thief. We'll discuss the difference in a moment. Okay. Now, if he was a thief, and he stole something, and he no longer had the item which he stole, well, he has to pay. And if he was a thief and he was in denial, and he hid the fact that he stole it and was caught, so then he may pay double. And if it was an animal, it may be that he pays 4 or 5 times the amount. But either case, we're dealing with a guy who didn't have the money to pay back. Because if he could pay it back, or a family member could help him out to pay back, he wouldn't be in this position of being sold by the Beit Din, by the Jewish court, into slavery to pay off his debt, number one. And for, let's say, tikkun, to make a fixing on his life. This will be what we call, the system in America, a prison system. Some call it either a punishment or it's a way to fix yourself. So if we're dealing with the possibility that we don't have a prison system in Judaism, but we're left with this situation where this person stole, he deserves to be punished on one hand. Really all he has to do is pay back the damages for what he stole, but he doesn't have that. So he needs some kind of reparation for himself, not just to pay back, but to also cure himself from his illness and his atonement for his sin. So he sold into slavery for 6 years. That's one way of being sold into slavery. There's another way, and that is if someone is just down and out, mamash miskain, he's really has nothing, not even any food. He has no shelter, no food, he has no way of making a living. So a person like that can sell himself into slavery. Okay. So that's what we're dealing with. Now, another case, we're talking about where the owner allows or gives a Canaanite, female Canaanite slave woman to his newly purchased Jewish male slave. And what's the purpose of that? We're going to see a little bit further on, but that's to have children. Now, a single male Jewish slave will not be allowed to be in this position that the owner can grant him this non-Jewish slave woman to produce children with. Okay, so we're dealing with only a person who is married, as we will also see as we get into this. So we're going to start out with verse 4, which I believe we read. And the Kli Yakar begins by saying, Bizman shehu nisui techila, we're dealing with a case at a time where he was previously married, he was already married, he was married originally. Ozdaka mutar lerabo litain lo shifcha. It's only then, specifically, that it's permissible for his master to grant him, to give him this non-Jewish female slave or servant called a shifcha. Now we're going to get into the reasons why. Why is it that it's only someone who's married? There are some that say the reason is because if he was not married, we are worried or concerned that maybe he will say at the end of his 6 years, Ahavti es ishti hashivcha, I love my shiksa, my non-Jewish wife. Avoim hu nesoi kavar Yisraelit, but if he's already married to a Jewish woman, ein lechush kochach, we're not so concerned that he will say that. Why? Ki kavar davcha nafsho b'ahavat ha-Yisraelit, because his soul has already cleaved with love to this Jewish woman, and we're not worried he's going to stick around and hang out and say, as we will see later, I want to be a slave forever because I love this woman and I don't want to leave her, or I love my children who were born from this non-Jewish woman, I don't want to leave them for my whole life. He already has a life. He has a Jewish woman that he's married to, and he had developed a relationship with her, a very deep and meaningful relationship, and he's not willing to give that up and stick around just for the non-Jewish woman. And there are some that say the reason that we just explained, that it's only a married man that it's permissible for the master to grant this non-Jewish slave woman to, is that the Shi'im hu nesoi, since if he is married, remember this guy's married, he stole, and he may have 6 kids or more, who knows. So what happens is, what kind of master is going to go to the slave market? Well, he doesn't really go to the slave market in this case. He goes to the Poston and he purchases this Jewish slave for the sake of, let's say, also reparations. He's helping to pay off his debt, and in return he's going to get some labor. Remember, the way Jewish slaves work are, you're not allowed to treat your slave any worse than you would do anything yourself, meaning you can't give him labor that is meaningless, and if you only have one pillow, you have to give him the pillow. Jewish slaves are taken care of pretty well, but not only that, think about it, he comes in married and he's got 6 kids, so the owner's going to take care of them as well. That's a big burden. So the fact that the owner is going to take care of this slave, Jewish slave's wife and children, it's like crazy. Why would anybody want to get involved in such a situation? Literally, then he wouldn't be interested. There wouldn't want any master to purchase and to enter his own head into such a burden by taking on the whole family. Therefore, parallel to this, and maybe as a motivation or as a reward for taking care of this person who sold himself into slavery, or who was sold by the Beis Din, the Jewish court, because he stole and couldn't pay back, as a reward or as compensation or as motivation to take on such a burden, the Torah gave him the merit that he's able to give over this non-Jewish female slave to give birth from her more slaves, which is a commodity which could be worth a lot of money. Instead of going down to the shuk, instead of going down to the slave market and purchasing, he basically has a stud, so to speak, an alpha male that is able to produce more slaves through the owner's own slave woman. Because the owner can't be with a slave woman, but the Jewish slave can be if he's already married. But if this slave man, this Jewish slave man, is not married, meaning previously to coming into slavery, yesh lo konim harbe balav hachi. So obviously, many more people would purchase him. He would be, let's say, a single guy that the master only has to take care of him, and he'll produce whatever it is that the owner asked him to do. So that's a better purchase, and more people will be likely to purchase a single male. So to offset that, meaning if a man comes in married and has already a wife and children, so then the benefits, the produce of the shivcha, the little slave babies, will then belong to the owner. Perhaps there's also other additional benefits. Well, think about this. So if he was never married, right, what's going to do? During that time, he's not going to have any children. Well, let's say, for example, right, if he was not married, he was going to have non-Jewish children. So because of his bitul, his negation of the mitzvah, the commandment of be fruitful and multiply, ki'im hu nesoi, so now if the guy was married, hooray hu mekayim mitzvazu im ha-Yisraeli, he's obviously going to fulfill his command by being with his Jewish wife. So the Torah itself is not that concerned for whatever involvement he has with the non-Jewish slave woman. But if this Jewish male slave, he was not married, so then certainly he will not have Jewish children. He will not have any children at all, because we're not going to allow him to. But if he would have been allowed to be with this non-Jewish woman, he would not have Jewish children. And all of his seed gets wasted with this non-Jewish woman. Okay, so that's verse 4. Now we're going to go to see verse 5. So verse 5 in Hebrew says like this, Im Yomer Yomer Ha'evid Ha'afti Es Adoni. He says, the servant says, but if the servant says to the master, I'm sorry. Now we're going to start verse 5. But if the servant shall say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go free. I'll read verse 6 as well. Then his master shall bring him to the judges, and shall bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall bore through his ear with an awl, A-W-L, and he shall serve him forever. In Hebrew. V'im amor yomar ha'eved, if the Eved will surely say, Ahavti es Adoni, I love my master, Ves ishti, and my wife, Ves benai, and my children, Lo eitzei chafshi, and I'm not going anywhere for free, I'm not leaving. Yishu Adonov Elohim, so the master shall bring him to the judges. Yishu es Adelis, and they bring him to the doorpost, or the door, El HaMezuzah, or to the doorpost. The mezuzah is the portion we put on the doorpost, but it's the same name as the doorpost itself. V'rotza Donav es Azno b'martzeha, and the master shall bore through his ear with the owl, A-W-L, and he shall serve him forever. Okay, so what do we have going on here? He starts off by explaining what is the reason that we bore his ear. The reason for the boring of the ear. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, says Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Oizin sheshama al har Sinai lo tignoid. Regarding the ear, it was the ear that heard on Mount Sinai the 10 Commandments, and one of those, or 10 statements, and one of those statements was, you shall not steal. This is brought down in the Midrashiah. We don't have the whole quote here, but the idea was the same ear that heard the commandments from God's own mouth went and stole, he shall be bored, meaning the ear that heard, the ear shall be bored, meaning marked. So there's some really good questions here, and we start off by saying, Makshimola. They were questioned about this. Lama lo yiratza miyad kishemoichri mosa beisdin o moichir atzmoi. Why didn't the beisdin immediately bore his ear upon his being sold or selling himself? Meaning, if what we're going to now really dissect the words of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's trying to explain why is it that the ear is bored, because it was the ear that heard don't steal. So why are we only boring the ear after 6 years of service, and only then when he decides he wants to serve his master forever, that we remind him then that you heard at Har Sinai, the ear that heard at Har Sinai, don't steal, and that same ear is going to be bored. It's a little bit counterintuitive. It's a great question. Shouldn't the ear have been bored immediately upon his being sold into slavery? It seems more logical, or just it's pleasant to explain it in the following way. That's why we're going to explain. That is why he is afflicted or hit in the ear. Like it's brought down in the Gemara in Baba Kama on Daf 79b. Why is it that the Torah is more strict, severe in its punishment towards a thief than towards a robber? I mentioned earlier we were going to discuss the difference between a thief, a ganav, and a robber who is a gazlan. So what's the difference? And this is really counterintuitive if you ask me. So the ganav is covert. The ganav tries to steal in a way that nobody knows, no human beings, nobody knows that he's doing it. Right? He hides, he digs himself in, he comes in the middle of the night. The gazlan, the robber, so he'll come in the middle of the day, he'll come in your face, he'll hold you up with a gun. It could be an armed robbery or whatever it is. It's a forced type of thievery as opposed to a sneaky way of thievery. So this forced way of thievery is in your face, not afraid necessarily of the people he's stealing from. So that's the question. So why is the Torah more strict? Meaning that the Ganav has to pay twice, or even in case of certain animals 4 or 5 times, whereas the Gazlan only pays back what he stole. Lefisha Ganav lo hishva kavod evid likvod kono. What's the difference? That the one who steals covertly, in a hidden way, he's not equating God with people, meaning he's more afraid of people than he is of God. God's looking and knowing all the time, but people, he wants to make sure they're not watching. He's more afraid of them than he is of God. Whereas the Gazlan, the one who steals openly, he does equate. He has the same level of fear, meaning he has no fear of either. So it's a little bit, I mentioned, counterintuitive. So Kaviyapa also ayin shamala ki'ilu eino roeh, when it's the fact that he does not, the Ganef, the thief, is not so concerned about God, because it's as if he knows, he's understood that there's an eye above that sees, or supposed to see, but it doesn't. Meaning, maybe he recognizes a God, but the God has no power. He is not able to see. So an eye above, that's as if it doesn't see. And an ear above, meaning an all-knowing ear, yet cannot hear. Therefore, he gets this lash, or he gets hit in the ear. Now, it's a good question. Why the ear? We just got done saying about the eye that's, the all-seeing eye that cannot see, and the all-knowing ear that cannot hear, but yet we focus in only on the ear. The Fishachata Keneged Oizin Shamala, again, just to reiterate, this was why, because his sin was against the all-knowing ear that could not hear, yet we are giving him the lashes in the ear, or the boring in the ear. So that's the question. So now we can answer the question. The truth is, why is it the ear that's going to be afflicted or bored than any other sin? We say he sinned with his ear. Right? In Har Sinai, the Revelation, the 10 Commandments says don't steal. But there's a lot of other limbs. He could have been, running to do a sin. He could be using his hands to do a sin. There's so many limbs that you can use to sin with. Why is it that the ear is bored more than any other, not just limb, but for this particular sin, such as stealing? So, according to the words of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, which we quoted earlier, that it was the ear that heard Har Sinai, don't steal, and yet he went ahead and he stole, therefore the ear needs to be bored. Sha'al kol aveira shebetorah yiratzeh, shouldn't it be that upon every sin that one does, no matter what limb it is, either that limb or the ear? It's also the ear heard at Har Sinai, all the 10 Commandments and all 613 commandments during the 40 years in the desert. It's the ear that heard. So why is it only lo tignov that he uses as an example? Shouldn't it be any sin? Go ahead and bore the ear? Vein lahakshos. No, it's not really such a question. Im kain yilka gam be'eno. Because if that was the case, remember, his original statement was, not his original statement, but in the Gemara, it mentioned also about the eye that saw. This is the reason he said that the eye, the all-knowing eye, doesn't really see. So also maybe we should give him a type of wound in the eye. Well, we can't do that because the im kain, if you go ahead and knock out the eye of the slave, Yisama also, you're going to blind him, and he certainly will not be able to serve his master at all. Well, what about the guy who sold himself because of his situation? His financial situation was so down and out, so he sold himself. There's another reason for that. The whole time that he is considered a slave to other slaves. We're going to see soon a verse that talks about us being very special slaves of God, that the Jewish people are royal slaves. Here in this case, since the whole time that he becomes a slave of other slaves, so he's required to lean his ear towards listening to the voice of his master, not God in this case. And he removes his ear from listening to the voice of God. Since there are the authority of others on him. We're talking about you have God as the sole authority, and the person puts himself, was sold into slavery, therefore he's a slave of a slave of God, but he's now listening to the human master, because those are, at the time that he is in slavery, is the priority, and he is just denying listening to God. Which is not the case if he was sold on account of his thievery. So we're making a little bit of a difference here between someone who was sold into slavery because he was forced to, because he stole out of free will, but in the end, for whatever reason, whether it was lost, he consumed it got ruined, someone else stole it from him, doesn't matter. The fact that he stole, he has to pay it back, and he can't pay it back, that's more what we call onus. That was a forced situation, as opposed to the case we just talked about, where someone who sold himself into slavery, true, he was down and out, maybe accepted that, but he could have perhaps done something about it. But in our case where he was sold, out of the inability to pay back, the thievery, he was forced in this situation, because we know that the Beis Din is the one that sold him. Nevertheless, it's still proving a difficulty. Well, shouldn't it make sense then that the ganav, the thief, should be bored immediately in his ear, even if he can pay off what he stole, or return it and pay another 100%, or pay, for the animals 4 or 5%. Why isn't he bored then? If we're using the original statement that here that Har Sinai should be bored because it went ahead and stole, so why are we worrying about after 6 years when his determination was, I love my wife, I love my kids, and I want to serve forever? And only then we bore his ear. So too, the person who was sold himself, he should also be bored in his ear at the time that he sold. The answer to the matter is, we don't judge two people on two different cases at the same time. He might have done two things, and we're going to take the most severe thing, and he's going to have the most severe punishment. He's not going to get both punishments. Okay? If it's death and payment, he only gets death. He's patur, he is exempt in most cases, in almost every case, from the other judgment, from the most lenient judgment, or the more lenient judgment, and only gets the most severe. However, when it comes to anybody who steals, in this case a thief, if he has the money, shnai mishalem. We already know the verse says in chapter 22, verse 3, that he has to pay double. and he goes ahead and he pays the double, and that's it, he's finished. There's no obligation any further. But if the case is he didn't have the money and the court sold him on account of his thievery, they didn't have to pay, he couldn't pay it back. Ansho ba'altus. It sounds like the onish, the punishment is the slavery. And so too, similarly, with the one who sold himself on account of his pressured financial situation, gamu onus alpi davar hadocha hagadol sheraviu lidei midazu. So too, he should be considered onus. He would also be considered forced because of this horrible, this great pressured situation he's in, which brought him to this point. However, the bottom line is that no matter which case we're looking at, both cases, the Torah still gave both of them place to leave in freedom after 6 years. Once the 6 years are finished, they could have gone, Gamarnu, and going back to freedom. And then there's no pressure at all at this point. It's with a total free will and an open heart and a willing heart that they can just walk out and there's no pressure at all. But what happens when he says what I'm about to say? What if the slave says, wait, I love my master, I love my wife, and my children, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not going out to freedom. The end result is his free will. He has chosen to remain a slave of slaves. And he's removing his own ear from listening to the words of God Almighty. And it's then that the law would apply that he must be afflicted in the ear. And the one who was sold because of his thievery, he also needs a punishment after the fact from his slavery. Why? Because what are we saying? We're about to say this is all works retroactively at the end of 6 years. It's automatic. It's like revealed to us at this moment, at the end of this year, at the end of 6 years, that the 6 years that he just worked didn't serve as a punishment at all. Because his choice is still to remain a slave. Because we see in the verse in Deuteronomy 15 verse 16, Kitov lo imach, because basically he was thinking that it was good for him and with you, right, for the own master and for himself. Hechan anshu al lo tigno. So where would any punishment be for the original sin that he did of not stealing, of transgressing the Ten Commandments, do not steal? And also for the concept, if you look in Vayikra, in Leviticus 25:55, it says, Kli b'nei Yisrael vadim. Hashem himself says, you the Jewish people, you are my slaves, you serve me. So there's two sins here that were being violated once he decides he wants to remain in the care of this master forever. So it's retroactively showing lo tigno, don't steal, he was never punished for. He's actually enjoying it. Why else would he want to? As we said, it was good for him and good for you. And upon the sin of being a servant of a servant. Lo vadim, lo vadim. Okay? Al-Kain Yiratza Ba'ozen. That's why he is afflicted in the ear. Ki bezeh yepater mishnei averos elu. In this way he's able to be exempt from the punishment any further of these two sins. Ki oynish echad shayach al shneim. Because one punishment is relating to both sins. V'tan zemas pich l'divrei Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And this reason is enough for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. V'toritz gam kein lama lo yiratz miyad afilu lefi devarav. And this also answers up why he is not bored in the ear immediately, right? Even according to his words, because we only know at the end of 6 years what his true intentions were or are. And why is the boring of the ear specifically done by the doorpost or by the door? Because it's after those 6 years that the Torah opens up an opening for him to leave from slavery to freedom. The door is what revolves or turns around on the hinges. And the lazy person does not want to leave from the open door. This is just like someone who sits in a prison. And they open for him the door, whether it's of his cell or of the prison itself. And they say, go free, run away, escape for your soul. So he chooses what he is good, and he imagines all the good things that he had, that he could come to him. So he wants to remain in prison. It's a sickness, and many people, as soon as they get released, they go back and do a crime just to get put back into jail. They don't know how to deal, and they know that they have a warm bed and 3 meals a day, perhaps all the cigarettes they want, and they are back in prison, or they never leave. Therefore he remains with the door wide open and doesn't want to leave. And this is the reason why the law is that he should be bored in the ear by the doorway, or on the doorpost itself. What's written in the mezuzah? It's engraved. It's basically embedded in the Parashat itself. What does it say on the mezuzah? And you shall love the Lord your God. What does he say? He says something very different. He says, I love my wife and my children. And he is exchanging or converting the love that he has for Hashem instead for the love for his wife, the non-Jewish woman. Al-Kain Yirat b'mezuzah. That's why he gets the door in the ear by the doorway or by the mezuzah. Furthermore, shechol bein choyrim biyodu l'kayim mash ne'emar. By every free person, a non-slave, he has the ability to fulfill what's written in Mishlei in Proverbs 8:34. Lishchot al dosai yom yom lishmor mezuzot pesachai. In English, praiseworthy is the person who listens to me, to hasten to my doors every day to the doorposts of my entranceways. So this is talking about someone who runs to the shul, runs to the Beit Midrash, runs to the synagogue, runs to do God's will, to guard what is written in the mezuzah. Okay, so Bezeh Shoket Al Dalsos Rabbi, whereas the guy who hastens, who runs quickly to the doors of his master, not the God. Meser Oznoi Mishmoa Bekol Hashem, Lishkot Al Dalsosah. And he removes his ear from listening to the word of God, then hastens to the doors of his master. Al Kain Yiratzisham, that's why he is bored over there. Lomar, meaning to say, Hare Ata Meroa Bechiroscha Kavua Po. Through your own bad choices, right? You to remain here, Lo Tazuz Mikan. You will not move from here any further. So that's why it's done by the door. It's as a reminder, this is where he's living with his choices. You made the choice, now live with it. There's another reason for the boring of the ear. This is going to get a little bit mystical, metaphysical. Al derech amru chazal in Meseches Kedushin, Daf 70a, Kol hanoise isha she'ena hogenes lo, Eliyahu kofto b'kadosh baruch hu rotza. So any person that marries a woman who's not fitting for him, meaning they're not matim, there's something strange about this relationship. You know that it's not going to work out. Yet perhaps maybe she has money, he has money, but so anyway, he marries this woman for her money. And if you're matim, that's fine. But if you're not matim and you marry for your money, it says that Elijah the prophet ties him up, and God comes and rotzo, the word for boring him with the owl, but here we're going to understand it means lashes. So either way, Eliyahu ties him up, and Hashem afflicts him somehow. Al pi Rashi perish, even though Rashi explains Rotzo Malkehu Britzua. Rotzo, Rashi explains as lashes. They lash him with lashes. The Kli Yakar says it's more proper in my eyes to say what I'm about to say. Rotzo Martzeh. We're talking about the man who marries a woman who's not proper for him, who's not fit for him. He will get, I don't know if we're talking metaphysically, he will get this kind of a boring. And this concept we learn from this type of a slave that we just talked about, where it says, of Homer, I love my wife. And what is the category of his wife? She is the non-Jewish slave woman who's certainly not fitting for him to marry. Even though the Torah actually gave him permission, gave the master permission to hand over to him this non-Jewish woman, this non-Jewish slave woman, Gam leumat zeh notnu lo haTorah makom lahasir meyalav genai u'doipi zeh l'tzeit mimena lecherus. Nevertheless, in spite of this, the Torah certainly gave him permission to remove him, gave him the opportunity to remove himself from this shame and this blemish of being involved with this non-Jewish woman for the last 6 years. L'tzeit mimena lecherus, and to remove himself from it towards freedom. Amnam kishoimer, therefore when he says, Ahavti es ishti hashivka, I love my wife, who's this non-Jewish slave woman, Eino roitzer l'tzeit mimena, I don't want to leave her. Az doime ki'ilu ba'oisa pam mirtzono hatovu noisa ish psula zo. So then it's as if, it's compared to as if, at that very moment, meaning at the end of the 6 years, with a full free will, a good heart, not a good heart, but a willing heart, that he wanted to marry this woman who was not proper for him. Al kain yuka ba'ozno, therefore he will be lashed in the ear or maimed in the ear. Ki ein shum aver margish ki ima oizen. There's no more fitting limb, right? There's no limb that is more fitting to feel this shame than the ear itself. Mishamo dibat rabin, turn the page, that heard all this type of a slander and these negative reports. Misaviv lo lemor. What are people saying about him? Zu ishtcha psula. This is your wife who is not fit. And what are they going to say about the kids? The kids aren't even Jewish. They have a pagum. They're blemished. And therefore from here we see comes out the same concept or din, maybe even judgment of getting this boar, this I don't know what limit this point we'll talk about the ear, but that he would get lashed, so to speak. And I think we're talking metaphysically, but nevertheless this is the result of marrying or being involved for that additional, after the 6 years, what else is going to take place in your relationship with her as long as you remain a slave. Yesh, and here we're talking about a person who marries a woman who's not fit for him. Forget the fact that he's a slave, just a regular guy marries a woman, a Jewish woman, for her money. So these will be the metaphysical result of having children who are perhaps pigumim. There's another reason for the boring of the ear. Because really he should have gotten lashes or should have been afflicted with his whole body. But the Torah had pity on him. And he's going to get lashed, or he's going to get afflicted in one particular limb that is equal in weight or in importance to the whole body. Think about it a second. Someone who cuts off the hand of his friend. It says an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. We don't do that. We give financial compensation. So someone who cut off the hand of his friend, he has to give him the value of a hand. If someone, unfortunately, God forbid, blinded somebody, he's no, he's to give him the value of his eye. But if someone made someone deaf, the obligation is to pay for his whole body. So we see the equation that the ear is equal to the whole body. And that's brought down in the Musar Sefer of Rabbi Yonah. Okay, this is going to get really metaphysical and spooky. Milvad kol hatamim halalu. Aside from all the reasons we just mentioned, yesh inyan zeh remez nachon. There is within this concept a very good hint. L'kol ha'ivrim shebamachana ivrim. There's a little bit of play on the words. The word blind with ayin vav reish is a little bit related to the word like Hebrew with ayin vav reish as opposed to ayin bet reish. So you have ayin vav reish, which means blind, and ayin bet reish, which is a Hebrew. So to all those blind amongst the Jews, meaning spiritually blind, people who are in denial. So this is a very good hint to all those who are blind in the encampment of the Hebrews. Hanoyisim kol yemeim shel al shichmeihem kol minei avdus utlaos umachavos kedei lahasig hakinyanim hadum. This people who work, who struggle all of their days. They carry things on their shoulders. They're just involved in hard labor. Kol minei avdus, all types of labor. Utlaos, and all kinds of suffering. Mikavois, and all kinds of pains, in order to achieve great wealth, or many properties, or many possessions that you can even imagine. And it's those purchases, through the purchases, in order to purchase, he basically sold himself into slave in perpetuity, in forever. And he claims, he's convinced, he claims that he doesn't have a choice. By necessity, he needs all this money, all this silver and gold, for the sake of his wife and children. And all the increase is only for their sake. And he's not even looking towards any kind of retirement. He's not looking towards getting out of this slavery. He wants to, right? He's not looking to remove himself towards freedom. He doesn't even know what freedom is. He's so blind. He's not even looking to get out. And he reasons to himself and he accepts upon himself all this suffering. Just like we talked about in the verse where the slave at the end of 6 years says, I love my wife and my children, and I am not going out for freedom. Well, guess what it says in Pirkei Avos, chapter 6, Mishnah 2? Charut ala luchot. Yes, charut is a type of engraving, and we know that the stone tablets were engraved, but the same word for engraved, just a different vowelization. Charut is really, it's cherut ala luchot. So don't read graven, but read it as freedom. You find freedom through the commandment, through the law, through the luchot, through the tablets. Because of his connection to the pains of a man, because of the love for his wife and his child. Wouldn't be called a slave who decides he wants to stay on forever? He's a bored slave. He's a slave who has been afflicted. Because his entire life, this man did not remain quiet. Until at the end, he's already finished. He finishes all the vanity of his life, all the days of his life, all the years of his life were all for nothing. And when he dies, his wife and his children will not escort him. Well, I mean, obviously they will to a certain point. They only escort him until the rim or the lip or the edge of his grave. Misham yiparedu, and from that point on, you separate from them. They're not going to help you any further. They're not going to escort you any further. In Pirkei Eliezer, it says there's a mashal shel shlosha ohavim, and I have it in front of me, and it's this concept that. Here it is. There are three lovers that a man has in his life. And what are they? They are banav, bnei banav, children and grandchildren. That's one. B'mono, his money, his financial resources that he accumulated, and properties. That's two. Masav tovim, and his good actions. So basically he talks about the first two don't help you after your death, whereas the third, Masim Tovim, do. Okay, so the Kli Yakar continues, therefore we talk about a regular slave, right? What does he have to do? So it says, Higishu Adonav El Elohim, right? That the master brings him towards the judges. They has to be judged. El Moko Mishpat. This is really spooky. What does it mean that you now, at the end of 6 years, he says, I want to live in perpetuity as a slave? So they bring him to judgment. This is hinting to the situation that every man finds himself into. Because in the future there will be a judgment day. And there won't be any help from you, from your wife, or your children. And while you, in your own lifetime, said, Ahavti as ishti, I love my wife and I love my children. Well, they didn't love you that much. In fact, it was the opposite. They have abandoned you as soon as you pass through the delit. As the idea of petach, here it says in the beginning of Breshit, right, that sin crouches at the door. And from that point on, from the delit onward, once you cross that threshold, so they will not enter with you and save you at all. They're not going to be on your side because they're not present. Zerem is nachon. This is a great hint. Mistaria Torah, part of the most secret fundamentals of the Holy Torah. Shabbat Shalom.